So this is a nice little action tag external module. One of the things that we've had, I don't know how many people have asked us over the years to do something like this, and we've kind of done things like this using JavaScript. Basically, if somebody has a survey and there's no way to prevent the user or participant from clicking the submit button if they haven't filled out all the required fields. And so people would have surveys where, they have required fields and users will just click next or click, they won't answer them. And you could prompt the user to say, hey, you missed a field, but there's nothing to prevent them from going forward or even submitting the survey if those fields are blank. And we've kind of had workarounds by just hiding the entire submit button down at the bottom using JavaScript, and it's not as elegant and it requires some programming skill because every project is different. And so the ones that we've helped with, we've kind of had to have them build the project, and then I would go in and they would tell me exactly what criteria need to be met in order for that to be submitted, because sometimes it's not just the submit button, but if like you're checking if emails match, or if you're checking if somebody's 18 years or older, eligibility criteria, that kind of stuff. So I have to work with the person whose project it is to figure out what their criteria are, and then I build that into the JavaScript to show or hide the submit button. So this action tag does that for you, and it's relatively simple, and it can be as complex as you need it to be. So let me just show you, and if you guys aren't familiar with the external modules, it's over here on the left hand menu, and we'll click external modules here. And if you want to enable a module, you'll see here that I have the module enabled already. But if you want to enable a module, just click on the enable a module and it'll bring up the list. You can search for a module and add it yourself. Some of these we've enabled for all users or all projects, and some modules require configuration after they've been enabled. This one doesn't. So basically what this action tag or this module does is it gives you 3 action tags that you can use in your project. There's a hide submit, there's a hide submit form, and there's a hide submit survey. So hide submit will hide the submit button for everything. So if you're in the data entry view, or if you're in the survey, if you only want to submit it, if you don't have any surveys in your project, you would use the hide submit form, or you could get the same functionality with just hide submit. Same thing with the survey. If you're just wanting to hide the submit button in your survey, but not on your data entry form, this is what you would use. This one seems more likely because sometimes you may have a survey that has some sort of background fields that the project managers fill out that are separate from what the participant would fill out. And so you just want to prevent the person from submitting the survey as they're doing the survey, but you don't want to be prevented from submitting your own questions or your own, whenever you filled out your part, you want to be able to submit all you want. So the way this works is you have to, let me go to my designer here. Essentially what this does is you create a descriptive text field. And this one here basically just please fill in all required fields. And as long as this descriptive text field is visible, the submit button won't be visible. And so then you essentially have to create the branching logic for this descriptive text field to be the opposite of what you need for the submit button, if that makes sense. So for example, I just have first name, last name, date of birth, some quick eligibility criteria. And then in the branching logic here, I'm just saying all of these fields need to be required. Basically, I'm only showing this descriptive text field if any of these fields do not have a value, if that makes sense. Because I only want to be able to submit this survey if all of these fields have a value. So you kind of have to think the backwards. You kind of have to think the opposite of what you would normally think for the descriptive text field, because if the descriptive text field is visible, it hides your submit. You can also use any type of branching logic for the descriptive text field. For example, I have a banner here that says, that's basically checking if the difference between the date of birth and today's date is greater than 18 years or less than 18 years, because I want to show this to prompt them that if the person is under 18, this descriptive text field will show up. If they're over 18, they meet the age requirement, this descriptive text goes away, the submit button will appear. And finally, for these eligibility requirements, I have it set to where for the eligibility requirements, I have these set for no. So I would, in order for them to be eligible, I would want them to choose yes for all three of these. So the eligibility requirements descriptive text field will only display if any of these fields are no. So if I checked yes, yes, and no, then it would show up. It has to be yes for all of these in order for this to go away, if that makes sense. So another thing is that you don't have to mark the fields as required in order to use this. So I have some fields marked as required, these three here, but these three are not required because the external module doesn't care about that. All it cares about is whether or not this descriptive text box is visible or not. And so I can pretend that it's required. If you look here, these last three boxes, I can put them in the required state by adding them to this descriptive text that's prompting the user that they need to fill out a required field. So I don't have to have it be required. The next thing, once you have your descriptive text set up and you have your branching logic set up, the next thing you need to do is go into the design of the field, and you have to add the submit, the hide submit or hide submit dash form or hide submit dash survey action tag. That's the only way this works, is if you have the action tag. And it's a combination of the action tag and the branching logic that makes this external module work. So if we go to a survey here, let me just refresh it to make sure it's all clean. Right now, it's saying, please fill in all required fields because these are all blank. So if and I'm just going to put this as today, and you see that as immediately as I put today's date in, this pops up because clearly I'm not 18 or older to enroll. But if I change this to 2001, it disappears. And you can see now that the submit button is gone completely. So now if I click yes, yes, and yes, I've met all the criteria. All my fields are filled in. I'm older than 18 and I meet all the eligibility criteria. Now the submit button shows up. Now if I go back and change one of these to no, I don't meet the eligibility requirements. And the submit button goes away. If I change this back to yes, but let's say I clear out my name, now I don't have all the required fields. Submit button goes away. And now I meet the required fields, or all the required fields. But now if I change the date back, it immediately, I'm not even out of the field yet, and it immediately changes to I'm not 18 or older. So you can have multiple descriptive text boxes to guide your participants through your forms. And so it doesn't have to be just like, hey, fill all these fields in, these are all required. It could be, for example, 18 or older, if you're only interested in people who are Native American or Hispanic or, those kinds of things. You can have any check boxes or drop downs or whatever. You would just have to create a descriptive text box that catches that criteria that you want to make sure you are tracking. So, if you don't want somebody to submit something, for example, we had for our COVID antibody initiatives, we ran into a big problem with people. They had to enter their email address twice. And if they didn't enter their email address correctly, if they mismatched, we wouldn't want them to submit the form. And that was one of the big things when we did with JavaScript, is because it was such a problem that people were entering their email wrong, and we couldn't tell if they fat fingered the email address on the first one or they did it on the second one. So we couldn't tell which one. We can't say which one is correct or not. And so, we can't send them information. We would have to send it to both of them, but we would know what the valid one is. And it's, it's easier to just stop them and say, hey, these are wrong. You can't go forward. It's like similar to when you're ordering something online and you enter your credit card number wrong and you hit submit and it goes through and says, hey, these values are wrong, or hey, this is missing, that kind of thing. So, as long as you think about what your criteria are for submission, you can create a descriptive text box. And as long as that descriptive text box shows up when that criteria is not being met, then it will hide the submit button, if that makes sense. So does anybody have any questions?
So one observation, I think that this is correct, but since this is a survey, and before, were you going to show it on a regular form or not?
Yeah, I will.
All right, then I'm just going to say then on this, because this is a survey, normally if you have the submit button and you don't answer all the questions that are required, it will tell you that these are questions that are required and not let you to actually complete the submission of the instrument. It will show you that it saved the results up to that point, but it's going to prompt you, like if you didn't enter your date of birth, it's not going to let you, theoretically, not let you save the whole form and then continue to the next form until you enter the date of birth. So that's called a partial result. And that shows up in the record status dashboard as an incomplete survey. So this would, and there is a setting in your survey design that asks if you want to save results if they are incomplete, and if and you decide whether or not you want to count. Actually, it's, do you want to count incomplete results toward a criteria towards your quota of how many records you want to collect. And I don't know if you saw Alice's question. Okay.
Yeah. So if you don't, if there's no submit button, they basically just, their only option is to complete the survey or sorry, not like, for example, like if we weren't tracking, age and criteria, if we were only tracking So let me go back to this. If we were only tracking that the required fields were filled in, then they would just fill out the required fields and then submit. But if the submit button's hidden, the only option they would have is to just close out of the form. And so you would really want to make sure that you're only using this for like what you absolutely have to use it for. For example, like the eligibility criteria, you may want to have them still continue on. They may not be eligible, but you may want them to submit because you want to see how many people have actually filled out the survey, that kind of thing. So you wouldn't want to put the action tag on these, or, you wouldn't want to create a descriptive text box to hide the submit button in that case. This was just to give you an example of the kinds of things that you can use. And since Terry mentioned it, I did make this as a hide submit because it's just easier for me to show you on both the survey and the form. So if we go to the form, you'll see here that as soon as I open up the form, these save buttons are hidden. So let me just go ahead and add the same data. And as soon as I do that, the save buttons appear the same way as it would with the survey. So if I change any of these values, they go away immediately.
Okay, so you couldn't save any data that didn't meet inclusion criteria, basically.
Correct.
Yeah. So Alice, regarding your question, it's funny, you're the second person that has asked this in this week about dumping somebody out of a survey if they don't meet criteria. So this particular external module wouldn't do what you want it to do, but there are certainly ways to do that through we've been handling this through branching logic, and we will call a separate form. So, I mean, when you complete a survey, okay, when you complete a survey, there is survey completion text, but that's for just if you complete it. But if you get dumped out, then you may want to display a different message. In the survey design, there's only one option for survey completion text. But if you want to dump them out, you would want them to be able to submit. You're just going to hide questions that once they don't meet exclusion criteria, don't meet inclusion criteria, you want to stop them. You're going to hide all the subsequent answers. They're going to only see the submit button. And through a way that we set up auto continue or the survey queue, it would automatically go to a different form. And remember, because this is a survey, it'll appear as a survey, but it'll open up a survey that simply says, thank you for filling out the form. You don't meet survey criteria or whatever. And it prevents you from going back and changing an answer. That's what somebody else had asked me about. And Tanya had reminded me that this was a method that we are using with the vaccines, where we were bouncing people out of the antibody testing for a long time if they hadn't had their second vaccine, or if they were having, they hadn't scheduled their second vaccine or whatever. Anyway, so there are ways to do what you want. And, maybe we can work with you one-on-one, but using the survey queue, using branching logic, creating a survey that specifically only gives you your survey completion message that is fired up when they don't meet inclusion criteria, then those are the kinds of things that we would do to accomplish what you're asking. But it couldn't do it with this particular because it wouldn't save any response at all. And you would want to know, I think, that somebody started the survey and where they failed. But I'm just guessing that if you just want to dump them out with no message, I mean, you could do that. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. And I guess you can use the drop down for complete and incomplete. It's just that you can't save anything until you actually see the save and exit form or save and continue or whatever. So the save and the hide submit, that's a pretty sweet little thing when you want to make sure nobody proceeds if you don't have all the necessary data entered correctly.